In the summer of 1914, Europe marched toward war with drums, flags, and cheering crowds. In the streets of London, young men lined up outside recruitment offices, eager to fight for king and country. Posters promised honor. Newspapers promised glory. Bands played patriotic songs that made the coming conflict feel almost like an adventure. But hidden among the crowds was someone who did not belong there. He was too short for the uniform, too young for the rifle, too young for war. His name was Sidney Lewis, and when World War I began, he was only 12 years old. Yet within months, this child would be standing in one of the most dangerous places on earth, the trenches of France. How did a boy end up in the front lines of industrial warfare? And more importantly, what did it do to him? Chapter 1. When war looked like an adventure. To understand Sidney's decision, you have to understand the atmosphere of 1914. When war broke out across Europe, fear was not the dominant emotion. Excitement was. Across Britain, crowds gathered in public squares to cheer the announcement of war. Newspapers printed bold headlines predicting a quick victory. Politicians gave speeches filled with confidence. Military bands marched through towns playing rousing music that stirred patriotic pride. To many civilians, especially the young, the war did not yet look like mud, blood, and shattered bodies. It looked like adventure, honor, heroism, and a chance to prove oneself. Schools, factories, and neighborhoods buzzed with talk of enlistment. Older brothers signed up. Fathers volunteered. Friends disappeared into training camps wearing fresh uniforms and confident smiles. Imagine being 12 years old in that atmosphere. Imagine hearing every adult around you speak about duty and glory. Imagine watching the entire country move toward war and being told you were too young to join. For Sidney Lewis, the pull was powerful. Like many boys of his generation, he did not fully grasp the industrial horror that modern warfare had become. The First World War would soon introduce machine guns, heavy artillery barges, poison gas, and trench stalemates on a scale the world had never seen. But in those early months, few civilians truly understood what was coming. And children understood it least of all. Chapter 2. The Dangerous Loophole. Today, it might seem impossible for a child to join the army unnoticed. But the recruitment system of 1914 was overwhelmed. Britain needed soldiers, fast. Volunteers poured into recruiting stations in such huge numbers that many officers processed men quickly, often relying on simple verbal confirmation of age. Birth certificates were rarely checked carefully in the early rush. Physical examinations focused more on general fitness than precise age verification. The key question recruiters asked was simple. How old are you? And thousands of boys across Britain discovered something important. If you looked old enough and sounded confident enough, the system could be fooled. Historians now believe tens of thousands of underage volunteers slipped into the British Army during the early years of World War I. Some were 16, some were 15, and a shocking few, like Sidney, were even younger. Chapter 3. The Day He Lied. At just 12 years old, Sidney Lewis made a decision that would change his life forever. He left home and went to a recruiting office. No parents beside him, no one to stop him. Standing in front of an army recruiter, he gave an answer that would carry him straight toward the Western Front. When asked his age, he claimed to be 19. It was a dangerous lie. But in the chaos of wartime recruitment, it worked. Within days, Sidney Lewis, still legally a child, was wearing the uniform of a British soldier. The transformation must have felt surreal. 1 week, he was a schoolboy. The next, he was part of the largest war the world had ever seen. But the uniform did not make him older. And the war he was about to face was far more brutal than anyone at home imagined. Chapter 4. Training for a war no one understood. Military training was designed for grown men. Even they struggled with it. For Sidney, it was a trial by exhaustion. Days began early and ended late. Recruits marched for miles carrying heavy packs that strained their shoulders. Rifles had to be cleaned repeatedly until they shone. Drill instructors enforced discipline with sharp voices and little patience. And yet, remarkably, Sidney kept up. Witnesses later recalled that many underage soldiers were highly motivated. Determined not to be exposed, they pushed themselves harder than older recruits. Falling behind might invite scrutiny. Struggling might raise questions. So boys like Sidney endured the same physical demands as everyone else. Blisters, fatigue, hunger, homesickness. But the true test was still ahead. Because training camps were only preparation for the place that truly defined World War I. The trenches. Chapter 5, Childhood ends in the trenches. When Sidney Lewis finally arrived on the Western Front in France, the illusion of adventure vanished almost instantly. The trenches were nothing like the patriotic posters back home. The smell was the first shock. A heavy mix of, what earth? Rotting sandbags, unwashed bodies, and sometimes death. The trenches were narrow, muddy scars carved into the landscape. Water pooled at the bottom. Wooden duckboards floated unevenly. Rats, fat from feeding on battlefield remains, scurried along the walls at night. Sleep was irregular. Food was basic. Danger was constant. For grown men, trench life was psychologically exhausting. For a 12-year-old boy pretending to be an adult, it must have been overwhelming. And yet, like thousands of others, Sidney stayed. Because once he reached the front, leaving was not simple. Chapter 6, The Hidden Cost of Underage Soldiers. Sidney Lewis would eventually be discovered and sent home. Unlike many underage volunteers, he survived. But his story reveals something deeply unsettling about the early years of World War I. The war did not just consume armies. It consumed childhoods. Historians now know that huge numbers of boys managed to enlist before recruitment procedures tightened. Some served briefly before being discharged. Others remained at the front for months. Many never returned home at all. Their motivations varied. Patriotism, peer pressure, economic hardship, or simple youthful excitement. But almost all shared one thing in common. They did not fully understand the industrial scale of the war they were entering. Chapter 7, The Letter That Changed Everything. Weeks passed in the trenches, but the war never slowed down. Winter tightened its grip on the Western Front. Frost crept along the sandbags. Boots froze stiff overnight. Even breathing felt like inhaling knives. And somewhere in that frozen hell, the boy was growing up far too fast. One gray morning, as the men huddled in the dugout, the company runner appeared at the entrance. Mail call. Those two words were magic. Letters were lifelines. Tiny pieces of the world they had left behind. Mothers, wives, sweethearts, home. The boy rarely received any. After all, he had never told his family where he really was. But that morning, the runner stopped in front of him. You. Letter. The boy froze. His hands trembled as he took the envelope. He immediately recognized the handwriting. His mother. For a long moment, he didn't open it. Because deep down he already knew. Someone had found out. Finally, slowly, he unfolded the paper. Inside were only a few lines. Short, simple, but devastating. We heard rumors boys have been lying about their age to enlist. Please tell me you are safe at home. The boy's chest tightened. She didn't know. Not yet. But she suspected. And for the first time since he had run away to war, guilt hit him harder than any shell blast. Around him, the men joked and laughed over their letters. But the boy just sat there, staring at the paper, realizing something terrifying. He could not go back. Not now. Not after everything. And the war was only getting worse. Chapter 8, When the Sky Turned Green. By early 1915, the war introduced something new. Something that would haunt soldiers for the rest of their lives. Poison gas. At first, the rumors sounded ridiculous. Clouds that could kill? Air that could burn your lungs? But on the Western Front, rumors had a way of becoming nightmares. The boy first heard the warning just before dawn. Stand to. Men scrambled to the firing step. Then someone shouted the words that froze every man in place. Gas! Gas! At first, the boy didn't see it. Then, slowly, a strange greenish cloud began crawling across no man's land. Not drifting. Crawling. Like something alive. Panic exploded along the trench. Masks on. Men fumbled with the early gas hoods. Crude, awkward, terrifying. The boy's fingers shook violently as he pulled his mask over his head. Too slow. For a brief second, he inhaled the edge of the cloud. His lungs ignited. It felt like breathing fire. Around him, men began coughing, choking, collapsing into the mud. Some clawed at their throats. Some screamed for their mothers. The boy dropped to his knees, vision blurring, heart hammering wildly. This wasn't the glorious war he had imagined. This was slow, suffocating horror. And for the first time since lying about his age, the boy was truly afraid he might die. Chapter 9, The Night Patrol. After the gas attack, sleep became rare. The trenches were quieter, but more tense than ever. Because the officers had a new plan. Night patrol. Volunteers were requested. No one volunteered. So names were chosen. When the sergeant read the list, the boy's heart dropped. He was going out into no man's land. At night, where the dead still lay, where enemy patrols moved like ghosts, where one wrong step meant a flare and machine gun fire. That night, under a moonless sky, the patrol climbed slowly over the parapet. The boy's boots touched the muddy wasteland between the lines. The smell hit him first. Rot. Decay. War. Bodies still lay half-buried in the churned earth. The patrol moved forward slowly, silently. Every sound felt too loud. Every shadow looked like death. Then, a flare shot into the sky. White light flooded no man's land. Down, someone hissed. The boy threw himself into the mud just as machine guns erupted in the distance. Bullets snapped overhead. For several seconds, the world became pure chaos. Then darkness returned. But something had changed inside the boy. Because lying face down in the mud, heart pounding wildly, he finally understood something every veteran already knew. There was no glory here. Only survival. Chapter 10. The moment that could end everything. The officer called him in the next morning. The walk to headquarters felt longer than any battlefield. Inside the small dugout office, the captain sat behind a rough wooden desk, papers in hand, expression unreadable. "Young man," the captain said slowly. "How old did you say you were when you enlisted?" The boy's pulse thundered. This was it. The moment every underage soldier feared. Court-martial, discharge, or worse, humiliation in front of the entire unit. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then the captain leaned back in his chair and sighed. What he said next, the boy would never forget. Years later, when the guns finally fell silent and the war became history, the boy was no longer a boy. The lie that once got him into the army had long been forgotten by everyone else, but never by him. He had left home chasing glory. He returned carrying memories he could never put down. Sometimes, in the quiet of the night, he would sit alone and think about the moment he signed that paper. The moment he added those extra years to his age. The moment childhood quietly ended. Because war doesn't just change borders. It changes boys. And long after the world moved on from World War I, one former boy soldier still remembered the day he grew up too soon. Fade to black. Bye, we will meet again.